So again, my name's Jeremy Rude, and I am one of the reviewers at fisheryprogress.org. We like to think that Fishery Progress is a one-stop shop for reliable information about fishery improvement project progress. And our goal is to make verified FIP progress information accessible and reliable to industry and NGO users. So I wanted to start out by sharing a little bit about how the templates will be used on Fishery Progress and how we ultimately think that they will help make life easier for FIPs. So this is the Fishery Progress homepage, and I'm just going to navigate to a FIP profile by clicking into the FIP directory. Hopefully everyone on this call is somewhat familiar with Fishery Progress, but in case you're not, you're going to get a very brief and incomplete tutorial. So this directory lists all of the FIPs on our website. I'm going to just click into one. And when I click on one, it will bring me to the FIP's overview page where I can see a description of the FIP, its objectives, the species, the gear type, the location, volume of the FIP. Up top here on the right, we have some information on how the fishery is performing, and below that, how the FIP itself is progressing. It's a lot of very high-level information. If I click on the next tab, this Details tab, this is where you'll find the FIP's core documents. And so these are all the documents that a FIP would produce before launching. So when a FIP launches and submits their FIP to Fishery Progress, we check to make sure that they have all of the required documents. An MSC Pre Assessment or a needs assessment that shows how the fishery is doing relative to the MSC standard. A scoping document that recommends strategies for addressing the fishery's challenges that were identified in the pre-assessment, and a work plan that outlines what the FIP plans to do to improve the fishery, an MOU or a participants list that shows who is involved in the FIP and what their roles are, and then finally a proof of budget. These last two rows are for supporting documents for when you have multiple versions of the same document over time that you'd like to show. But it's really these first five that we're going to be focusing in on here today, and what I like to call our core documentation for FIPs. And during the initial review process up until now, we have been using a document here called the FIP Review Guidelines. And this lists the minimum information requirements that each of these documents should contain. And over time, we've received feedback from FIP implementers, many of you that are on the call today, that it would be helpful to provide templates for these documents, these core documents. And the hope is that the templates would make it easier for FIPs to create these core documents and therefore to meet the requirements of Fishery Progress. And it would also help us reviewers review these documents more quickly and get your FIPs published even faster. So where can we find these templates? If I click back onto the home page, the templates can be found in this resources section of the website. So I'll click into here. And here we have a number of resources that you might find helpful during the life of a FIP. We're going to click into FIP Templates, and this is where you'll find each of these templates below. So we're going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes talking about each of these templates and what is in them. And with that, I will pass the screen over to Jocelyn Drugan, who is going to walk us through the first one, the Rapid Assessment document, which on our site is synonymous with a needs assessment. So fire away, Jocelyn.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. All right, so I'll be sharing my slideshow with everyone. Hi, so yeah, thank you, Jeremy and Stephanie. My name is Jocelyn Drugan, and I'm with Ocean Outcomes. I'm a fisheries scientist on their analytics team. And so, as Stephanie mentioned, we had 3 organizations working to make harmonized tools. So we worked with WWF US and SFP to develop this rapid assessment tool. And because all 3 of our organizations have implemented FIPS, we had experience as part of that process to evaluate fisheries using some kind of rapid assessment. And so, as has been mentioned, this rapid assessment can serve as a needs assessment for a basic FIP. In terms of the general objectives for the tool, we wanted to have it be able to identify major deficiencies in environmental sustainability and also be relatively time and cost efficient to apply. So ideally faster than a full MSC Pre Assessment, for example. And then we also wanted to get co-development and feedback from multiple organizations. So as we were developing this tool, we shared the methodology with other organizations, some of which you can see in the bottom right of this slide, to try to get their feedback and make the tool more generally useful for everyone. So now I'll move into an overview of how the tool is structured. So it is a tool that needs to be compatible with fisheryprogress.org, and that's part of the reason we use the MSC framework for this tool. So we are evaluating indicators under the 3 MSC principles. So I'm showing those with these icons over here. Principle 1 being status of target stocks, Principle 2, ecosystem impacts, and Principle 3, management. So we're not reinventing the wheel. These are areas that have been considered and evaluated by many different organizations. In doing the development for this tool, we did some research. There are a lot of great evaluation tools out there, and we did incorporate some concepts from those other methodologies, for example, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Fisheries Standard. And under the 3 principles, we evaluate 25 indicators, which are pretty equivalent to the MSC performance indicators. And each indicator will get a score from the assessor. So the scoring categories are shown on the lower right. We have red, high risk, equivalent to a less than 60 on the less than 60 score on the MSC scale. Yellow, meaning medium risk, and green as low risk. And one feature of this tool is it's partially formatted as a decision tree. So I will illustrate that using an example. So for example, if we're looking at the habitats information indicator 2.443, we start off by considering whether there is information to evaluate the fisheries impacts on habitats. So we ask, does this information indicator have a red score, which means there's not really much information? If that is the case, you're saying yes, then you don't score the habitats outcome and the habitats management performance indicators because you don't have the information to do so. So hopefully that saves a little bit of time. But at the same time, you do have to highlight there's this lack of information, and this is a gap that should be considered if, for example, you're going to develop a FIP for this fishery. If, on the other hand, the information indicator does not score red, there is some information, then you do need to score the outcome and management performance indicators. So I'll just continue with that example to show you what some of the scoring guidance looks like. So the assessor should proceed in a stepwise manner through these different scoring categories. So for this one, starting off with the red scoring category, you'll look at the bullets underneath and see whether they apply. So under the red category, for example, here the types and distribution of the encountered habitats are not broadly understood, and information is not adequately to understand what the fisheries' main impacts are on those habitats. So if that's the case, then this indicator should score red. If, on the other hand, that's not true, you can look at the yellow category, consider whether the habitats are understood to some extent and whether impacts can be considered, or there's some information to evaluate those. And then if that applies, okay, great, it scores at least a yellow, and then you can look at green to see whether those apply. So that's an example of how the scoring can work. And then once the assessor has a determination for the indicator, they put it down and then provide a written rationale for why they gave that score. You can also add in figures, tables here, whatever supporting information you need to justify the score. All right, and then kind of going back outward, just how the tool can be applied. As Jeremy showed, you can download the methodology guidance and the report template from fisheryprogress.org. And then we do provide some recommendations on how to proceed, but I mean, the tool is freely available, so it's really up to the assessor how they do this, but you would collect information, do research, interviews, etc., conduct the assessment, and then once you have the report, then you can use the identified deficiencies maybe to engage the fishery, or maybe you just want that information as a scoping to understand what the environmental sustainability of that fishery is. And you can also use the report to develop an improvement work plan. And then so I'll just show very briefly what an example report might look like. Say you have an octopus fishery here, executive summary, what are some points about the fishery? You've got your scoring summary. So each of the indicators there with the rating, and then you can use this to see, okay, there are gaps in these particular areas, and those are the ones you might focus on in an improvement project. Yeah, and then fishery information, etc., and each indicator with the rating and rationale. So that's how a report might look. At Ocean Outcomes, we've applied this version of the assessment to about 5 fisheries. And in my personal experience, these reports run about 20 to 30 pages. And once you have the information you need, maybe about 3 to 7 days to put the report together. Yeah, so I'm hoping this tool will be useful and will be used by others. And if you do use the tool, have questions or feedback, would love to hear from you. All right, yeah, thank you very much. That's it from me.
All right, and I'll pass it over now to Stephanie to walk through scoping documents and the work plan.
All right. Okay. So the first one is the basic FIP scoping document. And again, just to refresh everyone's memory on the scoping document, the purpose there is for it to be a tool where you can highlight what the challenges in the fishery are that were identified in the needs assessment or the pre-assessment, and then lay out some potential strategies or actions that the stakeholders could take. And it's really meant to be a tool to then be used as kind of a starting point for discussion with stakeholders over what those activities in the work plan could be. So the basic FIP scoping document, you provide some of the basic fishery overview, again, really identifying what the exact units of the FIP are, so which species, which gear type, which locations you're talking about. Also useful to do the fishery supply chain analysis if you haven't already done one, to identify who the right stakeholders are to be involved in the project. And then while a basic FIP does not need to have an end goal of meeting the MSC standard or achieving certification, as Jocelyn noted, on fisheryprogress.org, you need to at least address the 3 principles of the MSC standard, which is the status of the target stocks, the ecosystem impacts, and the management. So you list out again what some of those issues were that showed up in the needs assessment. And then there's a section on where you note what the potential recommendations might be for how to improve those deficiencies. And the template provides some potential sources of information that you could use. So this is a pretty flexible template and just kind of highlights the key areas that you should include in a basic FIP scoping document. And then the comprehensive FIP scoping document. Since the comprehensive FIP does have the end goal of being able to meet the MSC standard and assess the fishery against all of the MSC performance indicators, this one is a little bit more detailed. The scoping document has to be completed or audited by someone experienced with applying the MSC standard. There's now some guidelines or criteria over qualifications for FIP consultants that are available on fisheryprogress.org in those FIP review guidelines that Jeremy mentioned at the beginning. So it would need to be completed or audited by someone that meets those criteria. So the first section here is similar to the basic FIP scoping document where you identify the FIP. So exactly what species, location, gear types you're talking about. And then there's a section to note a summary of all the performance indicators, how they scored in the pre-assessment. And then there's the section for noting all of the recommended actions that could be taken. So I'll do the example one. So you would have here what the performance indicator was, how it scored, and the reason for why it scored that way, which you would pull from the pre-assessment. And then there's a section where you would note what the improved recommendations could be. And again, this is to be used as just a starting point for discussion with stakeholders in trying to figure out what actions they want to include in the work plan. And then you also note the priority for that action. And priorities can be high, medium, or low, and it really varies on how you would rank those things. So, if you know something is going to take a long time to complete, you might mark it as high because you need to start on that right away. Sometimes, there's funding implications, so you might have funding available for a specific activity that you need to mark as high priority, but it's just helpful to clarify the priority for those. And then we also included a section on additional impacts for those FIPs that are doing things that go beyond the MSC standard. So that could be addressing any kind of labor, human rights issues, really working on traceability improvements, things of that nature. So there's a section on that as well. And then we move into the FIP work plan template. So this is, again, you would use that scoping document to talk with the stakeholders about what actions you want to do that would then be put into this work plan. And the template identifies the key elements that should be included in each work plan. And then we'll run through them here quickly. So first, again, to define your unit for the FIP very clearly. And then each principle of the MSC standard is kind of broken out by the 3 principles. So for, say, principle 1, I'm just going to get to the example here. You would note what your activity is. You would give it a number and a name, what the goal of that activity is or that action, and a description of what that really means, what the expected completion date is. So this is important on fisheryprogress.org to make sure that the FIP is staying on track. Again, what the priority is of that action, an estimated cost, which then would be used to go into the budget, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The responsible parties needed to complete this action. And then there's also a section to note what other performance indicators would be addressed by this action. Because as you all likely know, some actions can actually help address multiple performance indicators. And then going a step further, there's a table for each action to break that down into the various tasks that you would need to complete to actually achieve that overall action. And so these are broken down, and you would again note for each of those tasks who's responsible, what the starting and the completion date are, and then providing that evidence for completion, which is again a requirement on fisheryprogress.org to say that an action is complete. You need to make sure you upload evidence for that. So again, the purpose of these documents was really to hopefully make it easier for FIP implementers to set up their FIP, but also to make sure that it included all the information you'll need when you post on fisheryprogress.org. And so then you might have multiple actions for that principle one, for example. So you just duplicate those tables as often as you need to for the additional actions. And you do the same then for principle two, and finally principle three. And similar to the scoping document, we included a section here on additional impacts. So if your FIP again is doing things that go beyond the MSC standard, we want to make sure that there's a place for you to note that and keep track of those improvements. And then we also included a glossary that identifies some of the terminology used. And then the final piece that I'm going to talk about is the FIP budget template. And this is really meant to be a budget, but also somewhat of a fundraising tool. So the first section here is that you would, of course, include the cost of the basic setup of the FIP. So the cost for the needs assessment or the MSC Pre Assessment, the scoping document, and the FIP work plan. And you note that in here. And then once you have your work plan, you would then in the next section include each activity that's included in the work plan and note the budget for that across the years, however many years your FIP is going to last. So some activities might be done in 1 year, so you would just have the budget for that 1 year. Some span multiple years, so you would have varying costs in each of those years. And again, you would note that for every activity in the work plan. And then the section down here is so that people don't forget the costs of the actual management and monitoring and evaluation of the FIP. So there's rows in here for a FIP lead, a FIP coordinator, and this might vary by organization. In some organizations, the FIP lead and the FIP coordinator are one and the same. In other cases, they're different. A FIP consultant for the monitoring and evaluation of the FIP. And if the fishery wants to go for MSC full assessment, it's helpful to include what the cost of that would be upfront as well. So in addition to noting all of the costs for all of those, we also then added in a section where you could note the cost share for all of those pieces. So there's, group 1, group 2, group 3, you could add as many groups as you have, and just noting out who's going to pay for what pieces. And some groups might feel comfortable only paying for specific activities, and of course that's totally fine. But this is just meant to be a way to really keep track of who is paying for what. And then it also allows over here in this section, you can note what the total funded amount is that you have, and then figure out what your funding gap is. So that does help you when you're fundraising. Then you can very clearly see what your gap is and how much you need to fundraise for that year or for the total duration of the FIP. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Jeremy to talk about the MSC Pre-Assessment tool.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so the last template we're going to cover is this MSC Pre-Assessment reporting template. And an MSC Pre-Assessment is required for any comprehensive FIP, and it must be completed by a party that is experienced with applying the MSC standard, such as a registered MSC technical consultant or an accredited conformity assessment body, also known as a CAB. So this pre-assessment template has a table of contents that you can see here that describes really what the document contains. And it's really made up of these 6 sections. And I'll go over each of them very briefly. The first section is the executive summary, which, among other things, provides the main strengths and weaknesses of the fishery. The second section is an introduction. So here you'll find the defined scope of the FIP and the unit of assessment for the FIP. The third section is a description of the fishery. Here it describes the background information such as history, the location, stuff like volume, who manages the fishery. And in addition, it has background information as it relates to each of the MSC principles. So background information on the target species, ecosystem, and the management system. This fourth section is the evaluation procedure, which provides information on how the assessment was conducted. So things like a summary of site visits and meetings that were held, stakeholders that were consulted, that type of thing. The fifth section is on traceability, which contains information that's relevant to chain of custody certification. And finally, probably the most important part of this pre-assessment, and by far takes up the most amount of pages, it is the preliminary evaluation of the fishery. So this provides a summary of the likely performance indicator scoring levels. We scroll to this table, you would have a score for each performance indicator here in this column. It would either be below 60, 60 to 79, above 80, or even, I guess, 100. And next to that, a rationale for each score. So if we keep scrolling beyond this table and past the references, we'll find an annex. And this is where there is a more detailed table that scores each scoring issue within a performance indicator. And again, the justification for each individual score. And so the language that is used in each of these guideposts should help you determine if the fishery meets not only an individual scoring issue, but the combination of each scoring issue into the overall performance indicator score. So I will mention, just as a little bit of a side note, that anytime there is a score change on fishery progress, FIP implementers should describe the rationale for the change by using the kinds of language that appear in these scoring issue guideposts for a particular performance indicator. So I'll just show you what I mean. If I was to click back onto a FIP's Improvement Progress tab, here are the MSC indicator scores over time. And we see, from year 0 to year 1, there is a score change from below 60 to this is above 80. So if we were to click in here, we would like to see that in this rationale for score change, you're using a lot of the language that is shown in this scoring guidepost. So something that shows that it is likely that the stock is above the point where recruitment would be impaired. And actually, because it was moved to above 80, you need to demonstrate that it is highly likely. And of course, show evidence for that. Okay, so I know I just took us down a bit of a rabbit hole. I apologize for that. And I think that that is a good place to wrap things up. The rest of this table is just more of the same. It just has more performance indicators as well as their scoring issues underneath. So I'm going to now open it up for discussion with some questions and some comments. As Stephanie mentioned in the beginning, you are welcome to not only use the chat box, if you can figure that out, but as well, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. So I guess I'll start by just asking if there is any general feedback or questions that you have on any of the templates.
This is Wendy from WWF. I have a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. These are questions for Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. I have one question on the scoping document to start with, and then one question on the action plan template. So do you mind going to the scoping document template for a second? And my question is looking at the priority level that you put in when you add in the priority level for each of the, I guess, proposed actions that you add.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, you mentioned that I guess you can choose whatever priority level you want based on how you feel it, how important it is for that activity to be done. I thought that priority corresponded more to the score that was given in the pre-assessment. So if it's an SG 60, it should be high priority. If it's 80, it should be, or if it's 60 to 80, it should be medium priority, and if it's above 80, low priority. But is that not right? Are you saying that the priority should just be based on how you feel, how high of a priority it is based on your, I guess, the work plan or whatever?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think this is a change that resulted through this process of harmonizing things.
Okay,
so
cool.
WWF, that is typically the way we've done it in the past, is that the red indicators would be higher priority and so on down. But discussion with several of the other NGOs, they felt like that didn't always make sense. And again, that, you might have an activity that might take longer, but maybe scored yellow that should be higher, or you might have some funding available that you need to prioritize it now. So there were just different things that people felt need to be considered when deciding on the priority level for it. So that is a change from how WWF has typically handled it.
Can I add on to that as well? I also think that there are a couple scenarios that could happen. One would be that, if all of a FIP's performance indicators score SG 60, it would still be a useful tool to be able to prioritize what types of actions you would like to handle first. And in addition, I think that the way that the MSC standard is set up, there's a natural flow to addressing some performance indicators before others. So it might make sense to prioritize, even if they're scored all below 60, prioritize collecting information before you are analyzing that information and can come up with an outcome. And then perhaps the latter thing is to set management based on that. So just something to consider. That's kind of the way I had seen it, as being a relative priority.
Yep, helpful. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks. Yeah, that helps. And yeah, makes a lot of sense. So thanks for clarifying that. And then on the action plan template, so looking under the tables where you have the activity, and then you have the milestones, and then you have the start date and the actual completion date listed. Sorry, maybe I missed this because you were scrolling down, but can you scroll back up to the top part of that table where it has priority, estimated cost, or scroll? Yeah. So I was just wondering, because obviously fishery progress requests a start date and an end date for an action. And so you want to be able to put both of those in. So I guess that's where you see this expected completion date up here. Okay, so that's what I was asking, because when you went through it, down at the table below, it just shows the milestones, and then it shows start date, but it doesn't show expected completion date. It just shows the actual completion date. And in a lot of cases for our FIPs, we'll have milestones that will have different expected completion dates, even though there might be an action with 5 different milestones. And so we'll have different start dates and end dates for each of those milestones, which will be different from the expected completion date for the entire action. So just I mean, I guess this is just a suggestion, and if we're able to just adapt or add to these templates a little bit, I think in the FIPs that I'm involved in, I would probably recommend that they add a start date, an end date, and then an actual completion date on that table below, because it just makes it clear to know when each milestone is supposed to start and end.
Got it. That's helpful.
What I'm saying?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. Cool.
Thank
And
you,
are
Wendy.
you able to do that too on fisheryprogress.org, right? For tasks, can you do it at that level?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can
Yeah.
start and
Yep.
end date. And
That makes sense. We can definitely add that, so we want to be consistent.
cool. Those were my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Wendy.
Wendy.
Are there any other general feedback or questions on the templates?
I have a clarifying question. This is Neil Eshelman from WWF. Jeremy, the pre-assessment template that you showed, is that the standard MSC pre-assessment template?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. So it hasn't been customized in any way for fisheryprogress.org?
Nope. Yep. It's just the
Okay, cool.
standard MSC template.
Thanks.
Phew, that was an easy one. So a question I have for the group, unless anybody else has any other just general questions about the templates, is would participants like specific trainings on each tool or template, or do you find them to be self-explanatory and would feel good given the opportunity to just run with them?
Hi, this is Minerva. I think they are self-explanatory. I think that probably, well, for me at least, I would like to try to use them, and then I would know for sure. But I think they're quite easy to follow.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Hey,
So-
Jeremy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Is this Pablo?
Hey, this is TI. About maybe other similar tools that are out there, such as the fishery performance indicators, FishPath. Have you guys done any thinking about when one of these diagnostic tools makes more sense than another?
I think, Pablo, you were cut off a little bit in the beginning, but I think your question was more or less like, hey, how much thought have you guys been doing into other diagnostic tools that can help you assess certain needs that your fishery will need? And I guess the basic answer is what we have with these templates is our due diligence that we've done. Are we always open to exploring other tools and templates that could be helpful? Absolutely. But this is kind of what we've got to date.
And maybe this is Jocelyn. I'll jump in a little bit because as part of our development process for the rapid assessment, we did look at a number of those other tools mentioned. And I mean, I wouldn't say we've done a comprehensive look at when to use what, but at least within the guidance for the rapid assessment, we tried to at least list some of those other tools and where they might be helpful in a data limited situation or whatnot, just as an added reference. Hey, you can go check this out. But I mean, I do think a lot of those other tools are certainly useful in certain situations. Oh, but I would say for the rapid assessment tool itself, because it needed to be compatible with fishery progress and that framework, we did follow a certain pathway for how we put it together.
Cameron Dixon from MRAG Asia Pacific. I'm also on the technical oversight committee for Fishery Progress and work with Jeremy and others there. One of the challenges appears to be, from reviewing some of the FIPs, moving or translating the information for a basic FIP from a completed needs assessment such as a seafood watch report across to the MSC criteria. Obviously, be challenging to try to come up with, or timely and costly to come up with tools that actually map across from these other tools to MSC. As you've just said, their rapid assessment tool for motion outcomes has been based on the MSC tool, but some of these others aren't. Is there, obviously there's enough guidance within the MSC pre-assessment, for example, and there's guidance directly on the MSC website for people to try to get their heads around those translations. But is there anything that's been directed in this templates or resources that helps people do that, Jeremy?
Sorry, can you ask the last part of the question again?
Just that translation from things like seafood watch report or a fish source profile report into the MSC criteria on fishery progress. Is there any guidance or is it written in there for people that have chosen to use a seafood watch report, for example, for a basic FIP? Do you point them in the direction of the MSC website, for example, to try to make that translation across, or is it still just sort of up to them based on what they see in fishery progress?
Yeah, I believe as of now, it's more of the latter. Listen, since I've been with Fishery Progress, I know that there are constantly conversations going on about how we can create templates that provide some sort of translation between different sustainability standards. And it's tough for me to say right now. I don't know if I'm on top of the conversations enough to know to the extent that these translation tools are becoming available. But as of now, depending on what the kind of assessment that FIPs have to work with as a starting point, we're really trying to point them towards, the tools like the ones that we're showing here today on how to take what they have and perhaps build an MSC type assessment through a template like this.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Stephanie. Just to add to that, I think that was also part of the reason for the development of the rapid assessment tool, was that since it is more laid out against MSC indicators, then that could really just get a basic FIP started off on the path of that, so they wouldn't need any additional resources to try and translate. But of course, that's not yet a requirement as a needs assessment for a basic FIP, but that was part of the thinking behind the development of that rapid assessment tool. So for those who are starting a new FIP, they could use that and not have to run into that difficulty.
All right, and just to add on to my previous question, which was on if there is a need for specific trainings for each tool, kind of a follow-up question on that is that we are looking into getting these templates translated into different languages. I think initially we're looking into Spanish and Bahasa. And I just wanted to see if folks think that there is a need to do a training similar to what we've done today, very high-level overview of these in Spanish or Bahasa, and if that would be helpful, and to what extent, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't hurt for sure. I think that would be very helpful if once it's translated, you could do this in Spanish as well. That'd be great.
Okay, but do you think that the greater need is probably just starting to get the templates themselves translated into Spanish? Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
As a first step.
Okay, and the final question that we have is that Fishery Progress is planning to pilot test these templates with several prospective FIPs. And at that point, we'll make an evaluation on whether they should or should not be required for new FIPs to come onto Fishery Progress. And we just wanted to get a sense from your quick look at these templates today, do you think that requiring them would be a burden or a benefit?
And this is Stephanie, just again to clarify that this would only be for new FIPs, not for existing FIPs. They wouldn't have to transfer anything over.
That's right. And the translation, we would give everybody plenty of notice ahead of time to plan for this. I'm going to take.
I'll just say for WWF, I think a lot of these are very similar to our current templates that we use. So I don't think it would be a big burden to require it for those WWF who are developing new FIPs. But that's just from our organization perspective. So.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Do any others have any thoughts? This is something we're really keen to get some more information and feedback on.
Hi, Jeremy. This is the Smart Fish team. We also think it would be good to have them required for some standardization.
You read my mind, Ashley. I also love standardization as a reviewer. Thank you. All right, well, are there any last questions or last thoughts? Great, well, if that is the case, unless anyone has any last remaining questions, we can wrap up a few minutes early. I would like to thank our presenters, Jocelyn and Stephanie, for giving excellent presentations on these templates, and thank all of you for joining today. Just as a reminder, these templates are live on Fishery Progress website, and we will be making this recording available, sending it out probably next week to everybody who signed up for this webinar. So thanks again, and I hope everybody has a great Thursday evening, morning, afternoon, and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.